onto the fields. Just to kind of ground you again, so 500-acre nature preserve. We lease about 12 acres in here. This is our education space. This is where a lot of education programming happens. We have another 2 acres up there. For many years, like something like 10 years, our fence up there, we didn't have our field up there, we didn't have a fence around it. And also we didn't have irrigation, so we were very limited in terms of what we can grow up there. So a couple years back, we got a grant and we actually put up fencing and irrigation, and it's nice. We've been able to put that field into our normal rotation, and it's very productive. So yeah, let's go in. I'll just point out like some of our irrigation infrastructure. Actually, before we even do that, so I didn't mention that our water is municipal. It comes in through, there's actually a 6-inch main out. It comes from the road, and there's a 6-inch main here. And then it actually gets reduced, unfortunately, to a 2-inch line under our building. Under our building, that's kind of like our operation. So especially if you have municipal water, you have to have a place that's protected from frost for obvious reasons. We went through this bad winter, and I was a little worried because normally we'll have electric tape on it, but our electric tape fried, and I didn't replace it. And I asked Vassar if they had like a steel cable that was a little bit better, and they never did it. And we just have like frost blankets over it. So just kind of these, these plastic blankets that go over it, and it survived with no damage. So I was pretty happy about that. But when designing an irrigation system, it's really important to have isolation valves all over the place. So if something breaks, you can isolate that broken part and then fix it without turning your whole irrigation system off. So under the building, we actually do have a bunch of isolation valves. So we also have, because it's municipal, we have a backflow preventer, which I'm not going to go too far into that, but you have to have that so that irrigation water can't backflow into the main system if there's like a pressure drop, up line. So we have a backflow preventer, and then if something happens with our irrigation system, we don't get cut off from the rest of the water. So like this building where we have drinking water, that wouldn't be cut off. It's all kind of hooked up to the same system. This is just a little bit of an aside, but a couple of years ago, I made a decision to plant a bunch of rhubarb because I'm always looking for things that we can have early season that don't require a lot of work for our CSA. And it's actually been great. We bought a small amount of crowns because I don't know if you know how rhubarb, but it's like rhubarb's like a lot of crowns, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can like cut the crowns up into pieces, and then you can divide it. So they're fairly expensive, like $3 or $4 a crown. So we just grew them out somewhere else for a couple of years, got a whole bunch of crowns, and then we divided up and we did this. And we've sold thousands of dollars worth of rhubarb, and this week we're actually going to come in and do like one final harvest because it's a great crop. It lasts in your cooler for like a month, and you can just pull from it and sell it. It's just been really impressed with it. I shouldn't tell you that now because you're all going to grow rhubarb, and we can actually walk through. And I do have drip tape under here, so I'm able to irrigate this. Our irrigation, I've kind of so this is kind of most of our fields, like I said, we have like 27 blocks, and we have a 4-year crop rotation. So the order is not important, but there's brassicas. There's a thing called mixed, which I'll kind of show you what that is. Brassicas, mixed, cucurbits, and nightshades. That's the rotation. This area is weird because when they put in the fence and the road and the whole thing, these blocks are not all the same length. All of our farm is like basically the beds are 200 feet long, so it's easy for management. But this area was weird, so that's why we kind of established perennials here. So we don't actually have enough blueberries for our CSA because they established the blueberries when our CSA was much smaller. So that's always like, everyone always fights over blueberries. It's just one of those things. Let's actually walk through here. I just wanted to point out our really awesome garlic. I'm really proud of it this year. We made the decision to throw it on plastic this year, which we've never done before, and I think it made just a huge difference. Just to talk about irrigation, I have been conscious of irrigating the garlic up until this point, but with most things, once it starts fruiting or doing like its bulk thing, or like when it puts out a garlic scape, that's a lot of energy for the plant to give out. So I'm really conscious of giving it more water than I think it needs. And from now until basically July 15th, or at least anyway, for the next like 3 weeks or something, I'm just gonna be really focused on making sure that it has adequate water. Garlic, we need I don't have a shovel. We need to get a fork or something.
They were pulling up.
Yeah, they were pulling up. It's actually pretty dry. Oh wow, we're starting to size up. So you can just see, like most alliums, garlic has a pretty inferior root system. So it's not fibrous like, I'm gonna pull the Galanzoga. I'm sure I won't have a hard time finding one. For those of you who don't know, this is Galanzoga. It's not a great example, but you can just kind of see how fibrous the root system is on Galanzoga. This was on top of plastic, so it's not, it's less looking fibrous, but it just has much finer roots, and it's just so good at sucking up water and nutrients. It's like Galanzoga, if you guys don't have this, like wash your shoes before you leave, because this stuff, as soon as you start seeing flowers, it's already making mature seeds. So if I was to pull this little thing apart, there would already be mature seeds in this little seed head. So it can do that in as little as 30 days. It actually can beat out buckwheat in terms of, usually buckwheat's a great crop for competing with weeds, but this can beat it. So anyway, you can just compare that kind of a root system, and we can pull up some grass somewhere else. But so, am I gonna have to be more on top of water and fertilizer in this situation or this situation? Yeah, this situation, right? So you can just see they're not very fibrous. They actually don't even really have a lot of like root hairs. You'd probably talk more about onions roots than you probably know a lot more than I do. Do you want to mention something?
Well, I'll add a word of caution about soil moisture management generally with alliums and with garlic specifically. A lot of the bulbing alliums, you want to be careful not to allow too much nitrogen to be available as they start to bulb out. Again, because they are physiologically trying to transition away from pushing more vegetative growth and just taking the energy that they've already created that potential for and put it into the bulb. So under black plastic, like you mentioned, it's hotter under there, and if you're pumping that drip more and your organic farm and you're mineralizing all that pool of nitrogen either from your soil organic matter or from any feather meal that maybe you pushed in, that can actually delay bulbing and end up with a smaller bulb size at the end. So it's that balancing act, and more rot as well. Yeah, that was the other thing I was going to add is there is a kind of movement to go towards plastic mulch on garlic for a lot of different reasons, and some of my colleagues are doing research on it and its kind of interaction with some soil-borne pathogens as well. And one thing that I've just observed without any formal research on it is if you have any issues with like botrytis gray mold, botrytis neck rot pathogens, any of those, and you're in a situation where you're on black plastic and you have a really uncooperative spring like we had with a lot of rain and cool weather, you're basically, again, one of the advantages of that plastic mulch from an irrigation perspective is you're holding that soil moisture in, but when you have too much of it, and if you don't have good drainage, you can actually create a problem where those pathogens break out. So we're seeing kind of an uptick in things like botrytis neck rot, especially in garlic planted on plastic mulch. So just a word of caution. Yes.
Also, I know like in California, for example, a lot of garlic is actually, they sometimes prefer more furrow irrigation than overhead irrigation, just for that reason, because like if you have a lot of rain and water actually can get into some of these scales, you can get discoloration in the garlic. Do you know about that? Yeah.
Yep.
So that's why actually another reason I like the drip on garlic. Yep. So okay, but yeah, take a look. Nice garlic, generally weed free.
When will you harvest this?
Probably middle of July. So see how these leaves are starting to die down from the tips. So you generally just want to harvest garlic when you still have. So every green leaf, every leaf corresponds to a wrapper on your garlic, so you want to harvest it when there's still like a good number of green leaves, because that for us it doesn't matter because we're not wholesaling garlic or doing it at a farmer's market. Because if I was going to the farmer's market with garlic, I'd want to really clean off all those like outer wrappers and make it look beautiful. So for us, as long as I have like 4 green leaves, So if these were to die down and I have 4 green leaves, I would still harvest this. The other way that you really, sorry garlic, this is what we call destructive sampling. This is the telltale sign though of garlic being mature. So now see how we have clove differentiation? So see how there's cloves, and you see there's the paper in between the cloves. See how it's starting to pull away from the scape? So this is a hard neck garlic. It's not a soft neck garlic. Soft neck garlic's gonna be a little bit different, but see how we're starting to get these little channels around the scape as the bulb. So this is not ready yet because these are still going to size up quite a bit. But at a certain point, if I was to do that destructive sampling, I would actually see a lot of space in between the clove and the scape. So you need that, and then you also need the green leaves. So it's a combination of those two things. Anything to say about that?
No, that's plant nerds will prefer the split the bulb in half method.
Yep. So this was a beautiful stand of vetch and rye. So, you know, like Ethan mentioned earlier, we are really trying to build up, because our cation exchange capacity is relatively low because we have very sandy soils. We're always trying to build up our organic matter. Leaf mulch, we actually use a lot of leaf mulch, which you'll see a little bit later. We've actually started to use it a little bit differently, which don't know why I didn't think about it earlier. But there's this thing called the humification factor. So, you know, this sort of lignified cover crops, this has a higher humification. So this kind of a situation going into your soil will give you more organic matter and more humus in the end than something that's like very green and immature like grass. But anyway, we're constantly, as much as possible, trying to grow cover crops to try to build up our organic matter for one reason, to get more water holding capacity in our soil. And it's just so dry that I actually have to irrigate this just to cultivate it, because it's so dry that you know, if I took our cultivator through this just to get this organic matter to break down a little bit more, I would just totally destroy the soil structure. I was talking about earlier this aggregates, and there's a better place that we can look at it, but you know, even this is not awesome. It's just so dry that every time, you know, I do that and I break it up and I kind of break up all the aggregates. So I'm not going to go a lot into this, but you know, when we overhead irrigate too much, more than our soil can take, if we exceed that infiltration rate, we tend to break up all these aggregates with the droplets of water, and that's when we get crusting if we have high clay in our system. So it's just something to think about. So I wanted to point out, so this is where we use these micros. So these are the micros that I was talking about. Harry, can you show? Can we move it over a couple of beds?
Sure.
So the one thing I don't love about these things is, like, we have to have a critical mass to move them like far, but 2 people can just move them to like that furrow.
If we go to the left, we don't have to move again.
Okay. So so they water 2 beds. So if I want to water these 2 beds, so let's put them in that furrow.
Sure.
I just kind of generally do it this way. Yeah, I know. And on most of our things, we have these quick connects, just to make it easy. These little cam lock fittings. And she's gonna turn it on. So when I show you that pit, I'll talk about it. But we ran. So water comes from that building, and we have a main line that goes all the way down the road. And then it comes off in various areas, and each place where it comes off, we can shut it off and isolate it in case something breaks. Some people might get wet, so just FYI. I used to have this old irrigation system that when they ran it, and it was like 1.5 feet deep, so it would always freeze, and in the spring it was like a disaster. So when we put in our irrigation system, I made sure to run it down the middle of the roads. That'll stop. Very annoying. So we made sure to run it down the middle of the road, and then it comes off into these little pits. And that way I just have no chance of ever hitting it with deep tillage. So been really happy with it. It's like a 4-inch main line that comes down the road. It would have been nicer if we could have done 6, but 6-inch pipe is very, very expensive and probably a little overkill. It cost us about $45,000. But so this is a section. This is a nightshade section right here. This is a nightshade section. This is actually a mix section. So I keep all of my carrots in one section so that we can do basically what Chris here is doing. Well, Chris is actually cultivating the carrots with this basket weeder, but did you do the stale seed bedding already? I did. Yeah, so with this basket weeder, we can actually put these little sweeps down, and then we can irrigate the section, let weeds germinate, and then kill the weeds very shallowly, and do that like 3 or 4 times. And you can actually see in this section, there's almost no weeds. We probably will have to do very, very little hand weeding because we've done that like 3 or 4 times. So I don't know where I was going with that, but anyway, really love these micro sprinklers. And then basically, we can move away from this awful sound, but that's a pressure regulator. So I'll show you when we look at the pit. But these want to be run at like 25, 30 psi. Anyway. You can see, you can get a nice shot of our carrots, how nicely they germinated. So even in sandy soil, with this kind of stupid heat, you know, these pretty much germinated last week when we had really kind of cooler weather, but you get such a nice germination because with these micro sprinklers, I can just turn them on for like, if I wanted to do like 15 minutes, like 2-3 times a day, I could do that, and it's really easy. And you can see how fine the mist is on the drip, on the micro, so it really doesn't, we get no crusting whatsoever. So these have yet to be cultivated, and you can actually see there's like no crusting really. You still have nice aggregates in the soil. So I really like these micro sprinklers. They're a little bit of pain to move, and they're a little fragile. Not ideal. Let's move away from this annoying noise. Yeah, it just like tunnels through the seed and kills it. Anyway, so you can kind of see, I just haven't put the, I can show you in another hole, but we'll have a riser that goes on top of this, and we actually have 2 connections. One connection is a 2-inch connection with no pressure reducer, and that we run our overhead. And actually show you. I'll show you in a pit that has the top. But we have pressure regulators, or pressure gauges on all of them, so we can actually really dial in the pressure. So remember what I was saying, that with overhead, you'll have a chart with those rainbirds. You'll have a chart, and it'll say like at this pressure with this nozzle, you'll get this many gallons per minute. So we can actually with a simple ball valve and a pressure gauge, we can really dial in what that is. So if I wanted to know exactly how much water was going out, I could really dial it in. Not to say I do that, but I could do that. So you can see there's actually, the reason why it's leaking is there's a valve on the bottom that's not fully closed. I actually put in this little gate valve so that at the end of the season I can open it up. After I turn my system off, I can open it up and just drain the riser. And it's like I couldn't tighten it enough with my hands. I gotta get a little tool and tighten it. So let's do a little destructive sampling. I like destructive sampling. So our broccoli, Lauren, who told me to harvest this last week, where is she? So Brassicas actually have a decent root system. Still, they're probably only like 12 inches, 18 inches deep. But compared the root system of this is a broccoli plant to garlic, you can see much different. Not only do you have these like main little, it's not really a tap root. Would that be considered a tap root?
No,
Primary root. You also have all these fine root hairs that come off of it. So broccoli is actually, or brassicas in general, have better root systems. But still, probably at the most 18 inches deep, right? Would you say? And I keep on talking about this depth is because, we're talking about like how much water to add. So if I had like relatively dry soil, I wouldn't want to put out like, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch, because 1/8 of an inch probably wouldn't go too deep in my soil. And if my soil was pretty dry, you at least want to saturate the root zone. But if, with those little baby cabbages, I could get away with probably 1/8 of an inch of water, right? If my root zone was already fairly wet, and I just wanted to make sure that the roots had access to water, I wouldn't have to water that deep, because their roots are much shallower, and their water needs are much less. So, just something to think about when you're irrigating. Another thing, just like I was saying with the garlic, when it's doing its like producing its fruit, or it's that thing that you harvest, if you really load on water when broccoli is heading up, you will get a much nicer head. That's when I'm like much more thoughtful about watering and making sure things have enough water, especially when broccoli is heading. Broccoli is like a water hog. Anyway, because the leaves are waxy, but they're not quite as waxy as like a cabbage leaf. But yeah, these are going to be harvested tomorrow. Looking pretty good. What do you think? Yeah.
I just add the same caveat that I added with the garlic, that again, yes, they need water, but nitrogen management's very important as they start to head up. And if you get a flush of nitrogen availability when they start to push those crowns, you can end up with hollow stem. It looks like a boron deficiency. Or you can even end up with uneven crown development as well. So you get parts that kind of stick up and maybe start to flower while the others are in that tight bud stage. So it's understanding that interaction between soil moisture, nitrogen mineralization, depending upon how you're running your fertility management, and getting that ideal crown size that you're looking for.
Yeah, and for fertility, just for this farm, we generally we'll make a bed and we'll do a little bit of a we try to do as much cover cropping prior as possible, but we don't rely on the nutrients from cover crops to supply all the crop needs. We will do a little bit of a pre-plant, and then we'll try to side dress. We'll try to put on fertilizer at least like 2 times with broccoli, or some brassicas maybe 3 times, but the last time that this got fertilized was probably at least like, I would assume like 5 weeks ago, or like 4 weeks ago. So
What do you use? What do you side dress with?
we get a custom blend. So we buy it from North Country, and I like fish, not fish, sorry. I like feather meal. So the nitrogen is largely like feather meal, with a little bit of Chilean mixed in, which is really helpful for like early season nitrogen availability, because we get one mix for the whole year. And then we add like a little bit of gypsum for some calcium. We add a little bit of humates, like mined humates, which our fertilizer guy seems to love, because makes them more money, I guess. But there's a thing about having the humates actually bind some of the minerals and holds it in, so it doesn't so they don't leach as easily. I think there's something to that. And then it has a sulfate of potash, probably a couple other little. They always add a little bit of chicken litter because it helps bulk it up and it helps flow. And that's it. I stay away from peanut meals or nut meals, just because I just get worried about our CSA allergies and stuff. And when we're applying fertilizer on a day like this, even with this little wind, it could kind of blow onto stuff. So I don't know. I'm not sure if that's a real concern, but we stay away from all that stuff. They always want to put in when they make fertilizers, they always want to put in what's cheapest, which I get. And most of the nitrogen sources are byproducts of the animal industry. So.
Specify the amount of Chilean nitrate?
Here you go.
Very carefully.
Yeah, it's definitely less than 20%. It's like a pretty small amount, just for some early season stuff. And then it also has boron, because we are low in boron. So the boron levels change year by year depending on our soil tests. But because our soils are so sandy, we don't want to put in a big charge in the beginning. If you put in a large charge of fertilizer in the beginning, basically you're giving the plant fertilizer when it doesn't really totally need it because it's really small, and there's probably enough like available nitrogen in our soil just from cover cropping and from good soil management. But all these organic fertilizers do take time to break down, so don't look at my beans. I screwed up my cultivation on it. Here's another example of how I use the micro sprinklers. I'm actually germinating the dill and cilantro. The cilantro is coming up right now. So you can actually see how this soil looks a little bit more beaten down. It does look like there was a little bit of like the soil aggregates kind of broke up a little bit. That's because I actually ran the overhead here because I actually wanted to irrigate the beans as well. So the overhead kind of broke up some of the soil aggregates. Not enough where I'm worried about the cilantro. The cilantro is a really strong seed. I'm going to see how it's coming up right here. I'm not worried about it breaking through this like crust. Like I said, I don't really get a crust. I can very easily break it up. So, a plant is not going to have a hard time getting through this. But if you have, really heavy clay soil, you could get a really impermeable crust. But I do really like those micros.
Do you have a problem with the wind blowing them over? Like if it's a really windy day?
Not
or
really.
do they stay
A
up?
little bit. And if we have the option, when we set stuff up, I'll always set it like, so you can see, I should have shut this off a couple hours ago. I turned it on and then I was inside. And you see how the wind is blowing it? That's not ideal. So, because you see how on the upwind side, it actually really is not getting much water. So that's an example of how an irrigation system can be inefficient. But I was running it in the morning and it was perfect in the morning. So I just never shut it off. So that's where I may get, some deep moisture that may result in some leaching, but not enough that I'm worried about because we actually just side dressed that. So it'd be good to get a good flush of water in the system to get. I also forgot to mention that another reason why water is really important in the system, and especially in organic systems, because you need those micros. So it really encourages those micros to do their thing. Ethan will talk about a little bit later, I'm assuming, about we were doing this winter research, and one of the tunnels was bone dry for like a month, 6 weeks or something like that. And we actually did see in the nitrate tests that it took a long time for that. Well, there was less nitrogen availability early on than compared to the other tunnel that was, moist. So we were assuming that it was because it took a long time for that soil biology to build itself back up. But Ethan will talk more about that later. Let's just mention drip. Some people will do a single line of drip on a single line of crop. I actually really like having 2 lines. Because our soil is more sandy, so for one, I'm always conscious of, so when we lay down fertilizer, we only work it in very, very shallowly because I don't want to cultivate too much, so that this fertilizer kind of stays on the soil surface. So with my soil, because it's so porous, I actually want as much of that top surface to be wet as possible, which is why in the tunnel we actually have 4 lines. I don't run it for as long to compensate because I don't want to put on more water. I just want more of the surface to be wet. But I really like having 2 lines even on a single crop, because even if I didn't have that issue, if I had heavy soils, just in case one goes wrong, I still have the other one. And I could also irrigate a little bit quicker, but I also could go with a higher flow drip tape too, for that same reason. But I used to do like 1 line in all my stuff, but now I switched to 2 and I think it's much better.
Yeah.
And we are, time and time again, I have tried to hammer this down with my crew, that when we transplant something, you get overhead on it. You cannot expect in our soils to water something in with drip. Just like, actually this section, they tried to do that.
Let's see what you fucked up,
Yeah.
Lauren.
Don't fuck it up. It's because we fucked it up.
Which you can't actually see now, but like a couple of weeks ago, you would definitely see like skips. And I really think that was because they were trying to, they were running the micros. It may have been a warm day, because unless that drip is like right next to the root or like literally right on it, you're not going to water in a crop with drip tape, not in our soils. So we always try now to overhead something after we transplant. Right, Lauren?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Even on the plastic, you just
Yep.
try to.
Yep. Yep.
So the other thing I'll just add about the advantages of putting multiple lines of drip tape on there beyond what Leon's already mentioned is, again, most of the nutrients that plant needs to take up come in through the roots, and they need to be taken up in a soluble form, all right, which means they need to be in water. So thinking about the amount of area that root can exploit for nutrients, if you wet more of the soil profile, you essentially give it access to a larger pool of nutrients as well, which again comes with the risk of, if you overdo it, you're also going to leach out at least the leachable nutrients that are in that soil as well if you put too much soil moisture on there.
Has anyone ever noticed that after a nice rain, everything seems to grow so much better after a nice rain? Just, and I just really think it has a lot to do with that. It's just like wetting an entire, the entire soil surface of your farm, having all those nutrients get into solution, and then getting, moving it toward where the roots can access it.
The only other thing, just in case anyone feels like they have to go out and invest in overhead irrigation to get decent transplant take, one of the things that we did, I used to be a commercial grower, and we had very crappy overhead irrigation infrastructure on 40 acres. So we would just pre-run the drip. So we would make sure that we had great soil moisture under that plastic before we transplanted the crop, to not have to run overhead afterward, which worked most of the time.
Yeah. And also with sorry?
Just that part of the reason we run it on the plastic also, right, is because even if the soil moisture is what if the plastic is hot and when the plant gets on it.
So that's exactly what I was about to say. So the black plastic is great. I find that it's really good for warmer season crops where you actually want the soil to be warmer. It's great for early season. It's the cheapest, so that's a consideration. But we actually with that, yes, but with little delicate starts like the especially cucurbits, for example. If you try to transplant, whenever you transplant a little delicate cucurbit, it always kind of, even if you harden it off, it always kind of goes initially. And when it's laying on the black plastic, like a day like today, it will just die and get fried. You'll cook the stem. So I have my first planting on black, but everything else is on white. And we can actually, let's go to the silver. So there's a lot of different types of plastic you can use. There's black, there's white, there's different thicknesses, there's silver. But I want to go let's all touch the black plastic. Let's feel the heat of the black plastic. Generally feels pretty warm. And after you do that, let's go touch the silver plastic.
Finally, I broke down about a pair of sunglasses just to work around it.
So anyway, touch the silver. It's quite a bit cooler. So I'm finding that kind of like silver is kind of like the coolest, white is in between, and the black is the warmest. Because supposedly the silver is not only good for the coolness, but also it's supposed to repel certain flying insects, or in this case thrips. Although thrips are most active at night, so I don't quite understand that.
There's a lot of research indicating that you do get reduced level of damage and a reduced population is a perfect no. And there have been years in trials where they have a lot of overcast weather. And again, the mode of action here is just like it's annoying us to look at it.
Yeah.
It disorients and annoys the adults that are flying in. So if you get a prolonged period of overcast weather when the adults happen to be flying in off alfalfa or whatever, or feel the rye, then it doesn't work. So acids actually stain like
This
the
is a form of
melons and
kind of a micro,
that can help you.
although it does have a longer throw.
It's a wobbler?
It's not a wobbler, but they call it a mega net. Netafim is a company that makes a lot of irrigation stuff, but it plugs into these supply hoses. But I don't love this setup. It's a lot more expensive, but you can buy a lay flat, so the same thing that our sprinklers are being run off of, that lay flat hosing, and it actually has little ports in the hose that are just permanently bound into the hose, and it screws in, because the problem with these is if the pressure gets a little bit too high, it just blows out, and it's so annoying. And actually after a year, the holes just get the holes in this stuff, they get kind of like big, and then it's just really, really annoying. So you can buy this like lay flat stuff that has the emitters, that has these, that's not emitters, but it's like I don't know what you call it, but they're little holes that are just built into the plastic you can screw this thing into. It's a different type of fitting. And I think that would be a lot better of a situation. But I do like these, and you can kind of just set these up permanently. You don't, unless you're cultivating and stuff, you can just kind of set these up. And you can get them with all sorts of different types of heads. And I've really found that they don't clog actually that easily. They have pretty nice. They have a little pre-filter. So if it ever does kind of clog, you can just unscrew it and you take this out and you clean it. I really do like these, and you can buy these at Rainflow. But I made the mistake of getting green, and green has a very low gallons per minute. So I actually have to, if I want to put an inch on, I have to run these for 5 hours, and it's not convenient. I should have never gotten, I was trying to match the flow rate of those other micros that I have, but it's kind of dumb with my soil because my soil, it can handle more flow rate. But if you had, like I said, a really heavy soil, you might want to get something like this with a lower flow rate. So I actually did this on purpose. I ran these for too long, just for this reason. No, I'm just kidding, I really didn't. But you can kind of see in my furrows where the tractor tires were. See how there's a little bit of pooling? That means that I've exceeded my infiltration rate. And if I had very heavy soils, I would get I definitely destroyed a whole bunch of aggregates on the soil surface, but B, I would, that would cause a serious crusting if I had heavy clay soils. And you can really see kind of like, especially right here where the bed that's closest to the riser, you can kind of see that if you compare like the top of the soil structure over here compared to that, you can see that I did do some damage to the soil aggregates by running it for too much. So not a big deal in my soil, but.
Where'd you get the adapter to go from the lay flat to the hook and latch?
Nults will make it for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just to put, that's, having the lay flat as a supply line is fine, but then you have to have something to get it into your aluminum pipe, which is a limitation for a lot of, how much did Nults charge you? Do you remember?
$30.
$30, that's not bad at all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nults.
You just have to tell, it's annoying because it's not in their catalog and you have to tell them exactly what to give you, but, and there's also like, there's probably like 20 different types of like pipe. There's hook and latch, and that's made, there's a few different companies that have made that over the years, and blah, 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 blah. You can't, most of my pipe is actually 2-inch pipe, but now the smallest that Nults will sell is a 3-inch pipe. But I actually this is a 3-inch pipe, and I actually really love it. I love it so much better because my other pipe, I have to, because it's 2 inches, it's very uneven on the surface. The 3-inch, it's very stable, and we don't have to hammer in support stakes on the risers. So it's nice we can just set it up, and so, but unfortunately this costs like, I think this was like about $1,000 just for this setup. So I think we paid like, I bought 2 sets and I have 1 set in my other field, and I think it was like something like $2,400 or something delivered. So it's really expensive. And then, so you just can imagine if someone rolls over it because they're careless with a tractor or a, I always tell them not to, that's actually one reason why I really love these. We put down these weed barriers under our headers. So so that way I can mow right up to the ground cloth, and I won't mess up my header. But B, it's also a great place to put things. So when we take the pipe out, we'll actually lay it on the ground cloth, and we always put the head in so that if it's on the grass and people are driving, they may not see it. Anything that basically gets thrown into grass will eventually get run over. So I really like having that. And some people will put it in the beginning and the end to also give them a place, not only to hold down the weeds, but also to give them another place to put stuff that's not in the grass, a hammer or whatever. So we put our winter squash on. This is the first year I did it on silver this year. We have a very hard time with squash bugs. That's a big problem for us. So I'm hoping that this repels squash bugs. Although now that the foliage is kind of covering the metallic, I'm wondering if it's effective anymore.
I just spent some time looking around. It's
by like high tunnels, but I haven't seen any extra.
That's good. Yeah, it also seems like cucumber beetle has been non-existent so far this year. I know. So that's a good thing. Although I started to see a couple of leaf hoppers. So.
Yeah.
In this situation, so this is a mix section. It's a long season mix section. So we have leeks, celeriac, celery. These are our parsnips. We actually use the micros to water these in, get them to germinate, and then we hand weeded them. We also cultivate them, fertilized them like last week. We'll have to go through one more time and do another little bit of hand weeding, but then we'll actually lay down drip because I don't want to see. This is dumb to have the overhead here because I'm overheading this whole section over here, which I don't want to do. So we'll actually, after we go through one more time and hand weed it, maybe one more tractor cultivation, then we'll actually just by hand put down some drip just to be able to irrigate this throughout the year. Because and I put all of my long season stuff together because it's just all going to be here the whole season. We don't start taking out leeks for another few months, and celeriac will be here until September, maybe October, and these actually the parsnips we'll keep in here. We started to overwinter parsnips, so we'll actually leave them in the ground, and we'll usually get some kind of a warm spell in like February or March, and we'll dig them then. It's like awesome. Parsnips, everyone should be growing winter parsnips, and you call them freshly dug. I shouldn't, it's all of our trade secrets. I gotta stop telling you guys my trade secrets, but we put up these high tunnels, which I'm not gonna talk too much about the high tunnel, we've got after lunch, but just irrigation wise, so we went with these, we have a 2-year rotation for tomatoes. I really want to get a 3rd tunnel so that we can do a 3-year rotation for nightshades. But right now it's 2 years. So last year we had tomatoes in there. This year we're in here, and we kind of will bounce them back and forth. So we're able to do drip in here. Like I said, we have 4 lines on a bed. And then we also have the overhead. The overhead really just gets used for when I turn over a tunnel. Sometimes you want to flood some of the, like especially the salts out of your tunnel, so you want to put on like 4 inches of water, and that helps move down if you have salt accumulation. So like if you have a lot of, if you're putting on a lot of high calcium, if your water has very high in calcium, you'll get some salt accumulation, or depending on if you're using compost and stuff. So you want to put on about 4 inches of water all in like one go, which just flushes all those like excessive nutrients out of your soil. So I really love the overheads for that. We put in this really great manifold, so you guys can come in. We put in this manifold, which is just makes it really easy to kind of control the water situation. So I have 3 shutoffs for the overhead line. So if I just want to run one line, I can just one run line. I can run all 3. A lot of people in high tunnels, they'll just put in a frost-free valve, which I can show you in that greenhouse. It's just but it's basically, you're limited to a certain gallons per minute because I think it's like 8 gallons per minute is what can come out of a hose, something like that. It's very low. So that actually wouldn't be enough flow for our system. I didn't talk about this, but when you design a system, you want to have enough flow to run your system at least. So we actually put in a 2-inch. So we have a 4-inch in the row, and it comes to a 2-inch riser over here. It's below grade, so that during the winter, if we're not heating, we do heat, but if we're not heating, we could shove something in there so it's frost-free. And so this allows us to, so I got a little basic like filter that I actually just cleaned out today because it was starting to be kind of slow. I cleaned this out. We got a pressure regulator to keep this to 30 gallons per minute, or actually the pressure to not exceed 30. Although I'm thinking about getting rid of this actually, because I can actually dial in pressure with these valves. One of the things also, so then this runs my overhead. This runs my fertigation system, which I actually wanted to show you how I fertigate. I was going to do a fertigation today. So this is 7 pounds of Chilean nitrate. This is the Chilean nitrate, these like beady things. And then 4 pounds of sulfate of potash. This is so we put like normal organic amendments as a pre-plant, but for the drip system, for fertigating, we actually use Chilean nitrate and sulfate of potash. And these are special brands that are very water soluble. I mean, these are all going to be water soluble, but these are like exceptionally water soluble. So we just dump this in our bucket. Fill it up. What is going on here? Oh. Too many valves. And then as I'm doing that, I basically just use, this is like just for a paint bucket, for mixing up paint. Sometimes I'll actually boil a little bit of water, and I'll first use a little bit of really boiling water, but it shouldn't make that much of a difference. I can already tell it's mostly dissolved. So this is a mix-right. It's a mix-right fertilizer injector. It's a very controllable. It just functions just on the natural flow. So you turn this down a little bit. So I'll basically turn it off, and you open these guys up. So now this is basically forcing water to flow through it. Make sure it's dissolved. And
No, it's not. Same
I basically just put a little bolt on the end of this. I put a little bolt on the end of this just to weigh it down, so it doesn't come out of the bucket. A little stainless steel bolt. And turn this thing to on. And should be flowing. I wonder if it's because I changed the filter today. Oh, the drip has to be on, that's why. So we also have this little battery timer. So you can dial these things, and they're like $150. This is like an 1.5 inch one, so it comes with this little timer, and there's also this valve. So you can dial this to turn on and off when you want, but actually I just like it to turn off. So the way I use it is I just set it for I usually water now for like a half an hour a day, every day pretty much, or at least 5 days a week. That's kind of what I've been doing in here, which I have to do the calculations to tell you how much water it is, but it's a couple inches. It's probably like 2 to 3 inches, which is a lot more than I would do outside, but these in full canopy can be like 20 feet long. They just use so much water. It's kind of insane. So I'll turn it on. I'll set my timer for 30 minutes, which basically, actually I'll set my timer for 40 minutes because it takes about 30 minutes for this bucket to be empty. So now I'm turning it back off. And I'm going to keep on turning it off until I hear this thing start clicking. So here it's starting to click. That basically means that now I got flow going through this thing. And I keep on closing the valve until I hear the rhythm. It's a little bit of subjectiveness in here, but you hear the rhythm. You want a constant beat, and you want it to be, so see, now I'm opening it up. It's not constant right now. It's not a constant beat. So I want to close it until at least it's a constant beat. And then a little bit more. And that's how and then basically, that's the subjective part, but the non-subjective part is you can actually control your parts per million. by this. So, or your dilution. So this is, right now I basically have it set at like a 1 to 2. Not 1 to 2, that would be a lot. A 2%. So it's a 2% dilution basically. So it's basically sucking up fertilizer from here. In here it's mixing it with regular water that's flowing through here, and then it's putting it into my drip lines. So I'm actually going to close it just a little bit more to get it a little bit faster. And that's basically me fertigating. So it takes like a half an hour for it to empty that bucket, and then I let it run for another couple of minutes just to flush the lines out, because you want to flush the fertilizer out. You don't want, because that'll reduce your efficiency, because you can clog up your emitters. So this goes in conjunction with us taking leaf tissue samples, not that often, but like 4 or 5 times throughout the year. I basically know that I should have started fertigating like 2 weeks ago. This is actually my first fertigation. I kind of waited a little bit because we added more lines, and I kind of felt like that maybe they would get a little bit more fertilizer from our pre-plant than they did last year. So, but last year at this time, basically the leaf tissue was showing a deficiency in nitrogen. So you can't see it obviously, but basically you take the most mature, you go down your line, and you have a little sample bag. The sample bag tells you to fill it up to a certain line. You're kind of jamming leaves in, and you want to put in like the most mature, fully formed leaf. So this one basically I would probably take
The newest fully mature
fully formed leaf.
Yes.
So not this, because this is not fully formed, and this is even a little bit. If I had another couple of days, this would actually be a better one. So this fully formed leaf, you jam it in a bag, and then we send it to Waters Ag, and they'll give you like a printout of all the different nutrients in your leaf, nitrogen, potassium, blah 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 blah, and then it's actually pretty amazing. So you can dial up or dial down your fertilizer. Within a week or two, it shows in the leaf tissue. It's pretty. I'd highly recommend it. Actually, I think it's really worth it. Just to, even if you don't do it regularly throughout ever, just to get an idea of your system, how much parts per million of nitrogen or potassium if you're throwing in there. You can up or keep, you can like, I'm now trying to fertilize it 3 times a week. So I'll fertilize it on Monday, I'll skip it on a Tuesday, I'll fertilize it on Wednesday, skip it on a Thursday. Is that 3? Friday, I'll fertilize, so 3 times a week, but I'm watering 5 days a week. And if it's like a day like today, maybe even a little bit more. It's a little humid too, but if it was like 90 plus and very dry and super windy, I'd probably even have them water over the weekend. I'm not going to talk about anything else. We should go eat lunch. Is food here? Okay. If you have any questions, we can talk about it on the way. What?